Today we're doing an in-depth examination of a story that's become absolutely synonymous with American horror.
Mm.
It's a narrative that took a truly brutal local tragedy and spun it into a global pop culture phenomenon, terrifying millions. We're talking about the Amityville Horror.
And this particular investigation is so important because the source material really forces you to separate verifiable facts from supernatural claims.
And from the intentional strategies that were used to build what became a very lucrative legend.
Exactly. The story, which was, popularized by Jay Anson's 1977 book, it became the foundation for this huge film series. But before we can even begin to analyze the alleged haunting, we have to start with the solemn, unchangeable facts of the horrific crime that set this entire story in motion.
Okay, so let's unpack this carefully, because the origin of this whole narrative isn't a ghost. It starts with a deeply shocking, very real act of violence.
It does. The context here is absolutely vital.
So where and when does this story begin?
It begins on November 13th, 1974 at 112 Ocean Avenue.
That's the house.
That's the house. A large, very distinctive Dutch colonial revival house in a comfortable suburban neighborhood in Amityville on the south shore of Long Island, New York.
And on that night?
On that night, Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was 23 years old, methodically murdered 6 members of his own family.
It's just a staggering and heartbreaking loss of life. We really have to acknowledge the gravity of this. I mean, our sincere sympathy goes out to the victims, his parents, Ronald Sr. and Louise, and his 4 younger siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew.
It was a horrific, violent tragedy. And the facts around Ronald DeFeo Jr. are all a matter of public and legal record.
Right, so what happened during his trial?
Well, the trial lasted 7 weeks, and DeFeo's defense, they actually tried to argue diminished capacity.
Suggesting what? That
Yeah.
he was hearing voices.
Exactly. Suggesting voices or even demonic possession might have compelled him. And this defense, even though it wasn't successful, it really played directly into the supernatural story that would follow.
But the jury didn't buy it.
No, the jury rejected that line of defense completely. DeFeo was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder in November of 1975.
So that's exactly 1 year after the crime itself. And what was
yeah.
his sentence?
He was sentenced to 6 concurrent terms of 25 years to life in prison.
And he remained incarcerated for the rest of his life.
He did. He died in prison in March 2021. But the critical takeaway for our timeline here is that between the murders in November 74 and the conviction a year later, the house it stood vacant.
And it was intensely publicized, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone knew what happened there.
13 months. That's a long time for a house like that in that kind of neighborhood to just sit empty. It was such a dark history.
And that interlude, that period of emptiness and intense public scrutiny, that's the precise moment the story pivoted.
How so?
The house went from being the site of a horrific true crime to something else, a kind of macabre tourist attraction.
Yeah. So when a new family finally moved into this infamous, highly publicized place in December 1975, the stage was already set for the story that would capture the public imagination.
It was perfectly set.
And this is where the story really gets complex. We move from objective legal facts to claimed subjective experience. That family was the Lutzes.
George and Kathy Lutz. They had just married in July of 1975, only a few months before they bought the house.
And the sources are clear that they knew about the murders.
Oh, completely. The real estate broker informed them of the DeFeo murders during their very first inspection of the property.
And yet they still bought it.
They did. They purchased 112 Ocean Avenue for $80,000, which was described in the source material as a bargain price.
Right. And that bargain price, that detail alone, immediately brings up the possibility of a financial motive.
It's something skeptics seized on right away.
Can you describe the house? I mean, the structure itself became an icon of horror cinema?
It's architecturally very striking. It's a 5-bedroom, 3-story Dutch colonial with a distinctive gambrel roof. It was spacious, had a swimming pool, a boathouse. It was right on a canal.
And they moved in when? Late 1975.
December 18, 1975. There's a minor discrepancy. The prologue of Jay Anson's book lists December 23rd, but the mid-December time frame is consistent.
And one of the most crucial details, they didn't just buy the house, they bought the contents.
Exactly. Much of the DeFeo family's furniture, the furniture that was there during the crime, was included in the sale for just $400.
I mean, just imagine the psychological weight of that. Moving your new family into a house, knowing what happened there, and you're sleeping in the beds or using the couches that belong to the victims.
It's a very powerful detail, and it's one that J. Anson later leveraged to great effect in the narrative.
So let's just confirm the family dynamic here. It was George and Kathy.
And Kathy had 3 children from a previous marriage: Daniel, who was 9, Christopher, who was 7, and Melissa, or Missy, who was 5.
And they had a dog as well.
Yes, their dog Harry, a Malamute and Labrador mix. And according to the book, the alleged phenomena began almost immediately.
So the move-in was immediately filled with anxiety.
It seems that way, likely tied to the house's reputation. And the very first reported supernatural event centers around a house blessing.
Which seems like a pretty natural step to take, given the history of the place.
A friend of George's insisted on it. He said, given the dark history, it needed a blessing. George was a non-practicing Methodist, but he agreed to let Kathy, a non-practicing Catholic, arrange it.
And this brings in one of the most pivotal figures in the whole story, Father Ray, or as he's called in the book, Father Mancuso.
Right. The pseudonym was for privacy, but his real name was Father Ralph J. Pecoraro. And Lutz's choice to include his actual professional background added immense weight to the story.
He wasn't just a local priest.
Not at all. He was a highly credentialed man. He was a lawyer, a judge of the Catholic court, and a psychotherapist. His authority implies, a capacity for telling reality from delusion.
Which, in the narrative, makes his supernatural experience much harder to just dismiss.
Precisely.
So he arrives to do the blessing on December 18th, the day they moved in. What does the book claim happened?
The core claim is that as Father Mancuso was flicking the holy water and reciting the prayers, he heard a very distinct masculine voice come from inside the house.
What did it say?
It demanded specifically that he get out, a direct, aggressive confrontation.
And what was his immediate reaction, according to the book?
He was allegedly so terrified that he left the house right after that. But, and this is a perfect detail for the future narrative, he didn't mention this terrifying incident to George or Kathy.
So he left them completely unaware of this spiritual resistance the house supposedly had.
Exactly. But the alleged supernatural attacks on the priest didn't stop when he left. The narrative claims the house's malevolence could project itself outward.
This is where it really escalates, right?
Dramatically. Following that brief visit, the book claims Father Mancuso developed a severe, debilitating high fever. And more strikingly, he developed blisters on his hands. And Anson's book specifically describes them as being similar to stigmata.
The marks of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
I mean, that detail, using religious imagery like stigmata, that's significant. It's not just a medical symptom, it's a narrative device.
It signals that the malignancy in the house is deeply, specifically anti-religious or demonic.
Yeah.
It elevates the conflict from a standard haunting to a theological battle.
And then there's the phone call.
Right. On Christmas Eve, December 24, Father Mancuso supposedly managed to call George Lutz to warn him.
To warn him about what?
To stay out of a specific second-floor room. It was the former bedroom of 2 of the murdered boys, Mark and John Matthew DeFeo. Kathy was planning to use it as a sewing room.
But the call gets cut off.
Abruptly. According to the book, it was overwhelmed by static.
That is the perfect hook for a horror story, isn't it? The critical warning that's never fully delivered.
It is. Initially, the Lutzes claimed their experiences felt isolated, like they were each living in a different house. But the timeline in the book suggests things escalated very quickly, from these spiritual warnings to actual physical manifestations.
And that 28-day time frame is key to the story's intensity.
Pivotal. They moved in on December 18th. Over the next few weeks, the book lists increasingly bizarre and terrifying events.
Like what? What were the claims?
Clocks stopping at the same time every day, doors slamming violently, strange odors, cold spots, windows opening on their own.
And the swarms of flies.
Swarms of flies, yes, in the middle of winter. They claim they saw shadowy figures, heard voices, and experienced personality changes.
Particularly in George. The book portrays him becoming withdrawn and angry.
Yes. So if the book is to be believed, the climax was reached very, very swiftly.
So by mid-January 1976, just 28 days after moving in, they were at a breaking point.
They were. They claimed their final night was marked by events too frightening to fully recount.
They strategically declined to give a full account of that night, didn't they?
They did. And leaving that detail ambiguous, it just fueled the public's imagination significantly.
So after less than a month, they just fled.
On January 14, 1976, George and Kathy Lutz, their 3 children, and the dog Harry, they fled 112 Ocean Avenue.
And they left everything.
Every single one of their possessions. They moved to Kathy's mother's house in Deer Park. And the fact that they abandoned all their material goods was a key component of the story. It was used to validate the sheer terror they claimed to have experienced.
And the book famously ends with the claim that the phenomena followed them.
Right, culminating in that very bizarre, very visual image of greenish-black slime coming up the staircase at Kathy's mother's house.
That specific claim, the slime, it's often cited by skeptics as one of the most, absurd DeFeos, the kind of thing that helped trigger all the intense scrutiny later.
It is. And what's fascinating here, and what the source material makes clear, is the immediate and very mundane counterpoint to all this terror.
What was it counterpoint?
The very next day, January 15th, a mover arrived at 112 Ocean Avenue to collect the Lutz's possessions.
It's an independent third party.
Exactly. And this mover reported absolutely no strange noises, no cold spots, no paranormal phenomena at all while he was inside the house.
That swift, mundane observation, it stands in such stark contrast to the terror the Lutzes claim to have just endured.
It does. And it perfectly sets up the massive conflict over the story's accuracy that would define the next several decades.
And that takes us straight into how this narrative went from acclaimed private trauma to a published global phenomenon. The commercial machinery took over almost immediately.
Absolutely. The success of the book was staggering. Jay Anson's The Amityville Horror was published in September 1977, less than 2 years after the Lutzes fled the house.
So how was the book actually put together? The Lutzes weren't authors.
No. The book's genesis began when an editor at Prentice Hall, a man named Ham Mossman, introduced the Lutzes to Jay Anson.
So they didn't write it with him?
No, not in a traditional sense. Instead, they provided Anson with about 45 hours of tape-recorded recollections.
So the entire book is based on these tapes?
The entire foundation. It allowed Anson to structure the narrative chronologically and build suspense. The format was brilliant, really. It presented their claims as real events transcribed into this seamless, terrifying narrative.
And the public absolutely bought into it.
Oh, completely. The book was an immediate smash hit. It sold an estimated 10 million copies across its many editions.
And that kind of profitability, it instantly creates a whole industry around it.
A literary family tree. Other authors saw the potential. You got titles like The Amityville Horror Part 2, Amityville, The Final Chapter, Amityville, The Evil Escapes, all by John G. Jones.
And the paranormal investigator Hans Holzer also got involved.
He did. Holzer wrote a whole trilogy of books related to the story. Murder in Amityville, The Amityville Curse, and The Secret of Amityville.
And it's the origin of Holzer's involvement that reveals the, let's call it the underlying commercial cynicism of the whole thing. It links the paranormal story directly back to the original murderer.
That's the key piece of source material. William Weber, Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney, was the one who recommended Hans Holzer to DeFeo in 1979.
Why?
It was explicitly suggested as a way for DeFeo to get a book deal to tell his side of the story.
A story which often involved claims of possession or spiritual influence.
Precisely. So this strategic maneuver shows that the true crime and the supernatural narratives were purposefully merged by legal professionals who were seeking additional profit from the tragedy.
So the murder and the haunting became financially and narratively inseparable.
And that just constantly fueled the public's appetite for more content, which naturally drove the massive cinematic impact.
Right. The 1979 film with James Brolin and Margot Kidder, that's what really cemented the story in popular culture.
It was a huge commercial success. It led to a sprawling franchise that now has, over 20 films?
At least. Direct sequels, prequels, all sorts of low-budget spin-offs that are still exploiting the name today. And what's really iconic, decades later, is the visual of the house. That's what audiences remember.
Precisely. That distinct Dutch colonial house, and particularly those quarter-round windows on the third-floor attic level.
The eyes of the house.
Exactly. When they're lit up in the films, they give the house this menacing visual identity. It's often described as a jack-o'-lantern-like appearance or menacing eyes. That visual brand is what sells the horror.
But the irony is that the filmmakers were denied permission to film at the actual location.
That's right. Amityville authorities denied permission. So the first 3 Amityville films were shot at a converted house in Toms River, New Jersey.
Which they modified to look like the real house.
Specifically, they added those iconic windows. It demonstrates so clearly that the cultural impact relies entirely on that visual brand. The house with the menacing eyes, not the actual address.
And the commercialization didn't stop there. The 2005 remake caused a lot of legal controversy, didn't it? Particularly for George Lutz.
George Lutz was extremely protective of the truth of his story, even as he was actively commercializing it. He called the 2005 remake drivel, and he sued the makers for breach of contract and defamation.
What were the specific fictional scenes that he objected to so strongly?
There were two major fabricated scenes. One showed the George Lutz character killing the family dog with an axe.
Wow.
The other depicted him building coffins for his own family members in the basement.
Both scenes designed purely for shock and gore.
Purely. And what was the outcome of that lawsuit?
The defamation claim was dismissed in November 2005. But his opposition is critical, isn't it? It underscores his dilemma. Maintaining the original events were mostly true, while condemning later additions that took the horror too far.
It shows that even the alleged victim of the haunting had a very specific, marketable version of events he felt needed protecting.
So, if the book successfully created the legend, the period that followed was defined by this intense legal and scientific scrutiny aimed at just dismantling every part of the story.
And the systematic debunking is what gives us the clearest understanding of the financial motives at play. The scrutiny focused immediately on the foundational claims in the book, starting with the priest, Father Pecoraro.
His involvement was the narrative's central piece of validation, and it was quickly exposed as being contradictory.
Deeply contradictory. You have two distinctly different, incompatible accounts from the priest himself about his interaction with the house and the Lutzes.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, we have a legal affidavit filed during a lawsuit in the late 1970s. In this document, Father Pecoraro stated under oath that his only contact with the Lutzes was by telephone.
Which is a direct, sworn contradiction of the book's dramatic account.
A complete contradiction of him being physically present, flicking holy water, and hearing a voice demand he get out.
But then in the media, he offered a different story.
A much more sensational one. In 1979, he gave an interview for the TV series In Search Of. And in that interview, he claimed he did enter the home, was physically slapped by an invisible force, and was told to get out.
So you have a sworn affidavit saying one thing and a TV interview saying the complete opposite.
That shifting narrative was just overwhelming ammunition for skeptics. It suggested the story evolved to fit whatever was the most sensational version needed for public consumption.
And maybe the strongest evidence against the haunting comes from the people who live there long term, after the Lutzes.
The Cromarty family. James and Barbara Cromarty. They bought the house in March 1977 for $55,000.
And they lived there for 10 years, a full decade.
And they were very public about their experience. They stated unequivocally, nothing weird ever happened, except for people coming by because of the book and the movie.
10 years is irrefutable proof of structural normalcy, isn't it? It directly refutes the claims of physical damage.
They systematically rejected the Lutz's claims. They said there were no issues with doors, locks, or windows. They looked like the original fixtures. And they also tackled the claim of the hidden red room.
Right. The book presents this as some secretive, sinister space, maybe linked to satanic practices.
The Cromartys revealed the truth. It was just a small, unconcealed closet in the basement.
Just a closet.
Full of pipes and vents. It wasn't hidden, wasn't sinister. And the Lutzes would have known that, which turns the claim into one of narrative exaggeration making. A mundane storage space sound like a portal to hell.
Beyond the house itself, specific phenomena from the book were also debunked by investigators.
A great example is the claim of the cloven hoof prints found in the snow on January 1st, 1976.
A detail used to suggest a demonic presence outside the house.
Right. But researchers Rick Moran and Peter Jordan went back to the meteorological records, and their investigation revealed there had been no snowfall whatsoever recorded in Amityville at that time.
So just debunked with objective weather data. What about the community? Surely the neighbors would have noticed something if the house was under siege like the book claims.
No neighbor reported anything unusual during those 28 days. A check of police records also confirmed the Lutzes never once called the police.
Which contradicts scenes in the book and the film.
It does. And even smaller details, like the local bar, the Witch's Brew that appears in the story. Investigators found it didn't even exist at the time.
All of this systematic debunking points to a narrative that was constructed for maximum impact. And that leads us to the most crucial piece of evidence, the admission by William Weber.
The Weber admission is the legal bombshell at the heart of the whole matter. In the September 17, 1979 issue of People magazine, William Weber stated for the record, "I know this book is a hoax. We created this horror story over many bottles of wine."
That one statement fundamentally shifts the story from a disputed haunting to a purposeful, profit-driven fraud.
A fraud engineered by a legal professional. He admitted this fabrication was crafted during a meeting he had with George and Kathy Lutz.
A meeting that formed the entire structural basis for Jay Anson's book.
It did. Weber's statement gave the cynical truth. The myth was born not from genuine spiritual distress, but from sheer financial opportunism.
And the legal fallout that followed this admission just continued to reinforce that conclusion.
The Lutzes actually sued Weber and others for invasion of privacy and mental distress.
And that lawsuit was heard by Judge Jack B. Weinstein.
It was. And the proceedings were very revealing. Judge Weinstein ultimately dismissed the Lutzes' claims.
And he was intensely critical of the professional conduct involved, wasn't it?
Very. He expressed serious ethical concern about Weber's conduct, saying there is a very serious ethical question when lawyers become literary agents. The court clearly viewed the whole thing as a cynical business deal, not a genuine spiritual investigation.
And then there's the final, undeniable legal revelation, which often gets overlooked.
According to an article in the Skeptical Inquirer, during subsequent trials, the Lutzes themselves admitted that virtually everything in the Amityville Horror was pure fiction.
So that's it. A court-documented admission of fraud from the people who claim to be the victims.
It is.
Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence confessed by the story's architect, admitted by the Lutzes in court, George Lutz maintained the story was true until he died.
He consistently defended it, insisting the events were mostly true and that only minor details were exaggerated by the publishers.
And he tried to support this with the polygraph test.
He and Kathy took a polygraph test in June 1979, and in the operator's opinion, the results did not indicate lying.
But skeptics immediately countered that.
They did, by emphasizing the widely acknowledged unreliability of polygraph tests. They're just not seen as conclusive proof. It was framed more as a media tactic.
And the story has proven so resilient. It's even evolved after George and Kathy Lutz died.
Yes, the 2013 documentary My Amityville Horror features Daniel Lutz, one of Kathy's children. He was 9 when he lived in the house.
And his testimony didn't just echo the original story, it amplified it significantly. He made much stronger claims, stating that both he and George Lutz were possessed, and that George had demonstrated overt telekinetic abilities in the house.
And he added a new wrinkle to the origin of the alleged evil, didn't he?
He did. Daniel Lutz claimed that George's own dabbling in the occult, specifically black magic, may have initiated the demonic events.
So he's effectively blaming his stepfather for inviting the malevolence in.
Yes. It's a late-stage addition that personalizes the guilt and shifts the narrative focus.
So even with legal admissions of fiction from the parents, the supernatural claims continue to be reinforced and even escalated.
And that solidification owes a lot to the early investigators who stepped in right after the Lutzes fled, specifically Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Right, the famous demonologists. Their investigation was later depicted in the film The Conjuring 2.
They investigated the house on March 6, 1976 with a TV crew. And during that visit, a photographer named Gene Campbell took a series of infrared time-lapse photos.
And one of those images has become the most compelling piece of physical proof in the whole saga. The famous photograph. It allegedly shows a figure purported to be a demonic boy with glowing eyes, standing near the foot of the staircase.
A figure thought to resemble one of the murdered DeFeo children.
John Matthew DeFeo, yes. The Warrens and Hans Holzer have consistently used this image to suggest the house is genuinely occupied by spirits.
But the timing of when this photo was released is highly suspicious, isn't it?
It is. The photo was taken in 1976, but it didn't emerge into the public domain until 1979.
When the first film was coming out.
Exactly. George and Kathy Lutz appeared on the Merv Griffin show to promote the movie, and the photograph was unveiled at the same time.
So the physical proof was strategically aligned with the commercial release of the film.
It strongly suggests a media strategy aimed at maximum publicity, not immediate disclosure of evidence.
But not all the investigators who went in were believers. One of them, Stephen Kaplan, had a very public falling out with the Lutzes.
Stephen Kaplan, a self-styled vampirologist and ghost hunter, was initially brought in to investigate. But the relationship soured very quickly because Kaplan said openly that he would expose any fraud he found.
And if the Lutzes knew they were fabricating this story, that would be a serious threat.
It was. Kaplan went on to become one of their staunchest critics. He and his wife wrote a highly critical book called The Amityville Horror Conspiracy in 1995.
An inside perspective from an investigator who had direct access, but refused to endorse the narrative.
Exactly.
So looking at the legacy of the Lutzes themselves, what happened to them after all the fame and controversy?
Kathleen Lutz died in 2004 and George died in 2006. They divorced in the late 80s, but remained very focused on the narrative's commercial potential.
And George in particular was intensely protective of the story. He even trademarked the name.
He did. In 2002, George Lutz registered the Amityville Horror as a trademark. He referred to it as the Amityville Horror on his official website.
So he literally owned the horror.
In a sense, yes. He continued to claim that subsequent film producers embellished or fabricated events beyond his own original claims, reiterating his role as the sole authority on the mostly true events.
Which brings us to the status of the infamous location today. What has become of 112 Ocean Avenue?
The house is still there, but subsequent owners have been desperate to distance it from the notoriety.
They've changed the address.
The address has been changed. And critically, those iconic quarter-round windows, the menacing eyes from the films, have been removed. The house looks considerably different today.
An active physical effort to erase the hauntings' visual identity.
It is. And the community itself, they're overwhelmingly unhappy with the attention the story brings to the town.
They just want to move past it.
Completely. The Amityville Historical Society's website, for instance, makes no mention at all of the DeFeo murders or the Lutz family. It's a clear, collective desire to reject the fictional narrative.
And what about the house's monetary value?
It was sold in August 2010 to a local resident for $950,000. During a moving sale held by the departing owner, hundreds of people turned up out of curiosity.
Were they allowed to see the infamous areas like the basement or the upstairs rooms?
No. Access was strictly managed. Visitors were specifically restricted from going to the upstairs rooms or the basement, perhaps to maintain privacy or just control the lingering mystery.
So when we synthesize all of this, the narrative flow is just stunning. You begin with the brutal, documented tragedy of the DeFeo murders.
And that grief and infamy are quickly capitalized upon, resulting in this best-selling supernatural spectacle Anson's book and the endless film franchises.
And then comes the critical counter-movement. Researchers, neighbors, subsequent owners, and even the murderer's own attorney systematically dismantling the entire narrative.
The story is revealed to be a purposeful fabrication created over many bottles of wine, and later admitted by the Lutzes themselves in court to be pure fiction.
And yet, the myth persists. It's propelled by iconography and a commercial legacy. The ultimate revelation is just the cynicism in turning genuine, awful grief into a massive, multi-decade marketing opportunity. This whole examination, it really forces you to focus on the structure of belief itself. The evidence is overwhelming that this story was designed for profit, blurring the line between genuine grief and highly effective marketing.
Which raises an important question for you to consider, built entirely on the material we've reviewed here.
Okay.
If a story, fabricated for commercial gain and then legally admitted to be fiction, can capture and hold the cultural consciousness so completely that people still believe the events were mostly true decades later, what does that reveal about the power of narrative to override objective court-documented fact?
Thanks for listening.